So, guys, I just want to welcome everybody here to firefighterrecruitments.ca. This is kind of our fifth webinar that we've done since we started. And just quickly, a little bit about myself, and it's not to boast or to brag or anything like that. It's just more to give you guys, just to add some legitimacy to what we're talking about and to give you some confidence in what we're saying is accurate. So just a little quick thing about me. I've been a firefighter. I'm a captain with Peterborough Fire Services. I've been there for 28 years now. I've been involved in the firefighter interviews probably for over 20 years, where I've been doing interview coaching, as well as I own firefighterinterviews.com. So I have a membership-based website there. And I also just started, as you know, firefighterrecruitments.ca about a year ago with a focus on just some free information for people trying to get hired and just to give some people some direction. I also co-authored the study guide for the firefighter interview, and I've done quite a few things over the years. For more information, you can go to my bio on my sites. But I'll pass it to our guest now. I'll pass it over to Dave, Mr. Dave Gillespie, and he could just talk a little bit about himself. Go ahead, Dave.
Right on. So I was hired with Sean back in 1995, which sounds like a dog's age because you're feeling really old when you throw out 28 years. In that period, I realized that there's a lot of people who they're trying to prepare for firefighting and they're not sure how to prepare. I give credit to folks like Sean and Arjuna that work on this aspect, because I think so many good candidates get lost in the process. My particular area of expertise is coping under stress. I've both lived it. I decided to do some research on it. I looked at how people who are experts or really qualified at handling high levels of stress, how they handle it. So I did research with Olympic athletes, special forces, tactical officers, interviews, research on books, talked to high performance psychologists, with the development group out of Navy SEALs and Seattle Seahawks. So in that process, I've learned, all right, there's a whole bunch of really cool stuff out there that we as firefighters and firefighting candidates could be doing much better of. So that's my element that I'll share tonight, of what are those physical tactics that we can use to slow ourselves down, keep our thoughts in our brain, and be able to make effective decisions and communicate well under stress.
That's great. Okay. Thanks, Dave. Arjuna, did you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
It's good to see everyone. My name is Arjuna George. I'm way out on the west coast of Canada, out in BC. So I left the fire service in 2021 after 24 years in the fire service. So I joined in 97, so a couple of years after both Dave and Sean.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's been an amazing journey, the best career I could ever choose and ever hope for, even though I retired from early retirement due to organizational stress and burnout. So I think today's kind of session is so critical, so important for those who are just entering the fire service, or just maybe just joining the fire service at a very, maybe a couple of years into it or something like that. Or if you're a very senior person as well, because there's the best time to take care of yourself is today, if you haven't been doing a good job of it. So my goal is to share my story about burnout. I wrote a book about it, Burnt Around the Edges. It's kind of my story about through my career, all the stress that I went through, and then the tools and the tactics that I use to escape from that and thrive once again. And like Dave, I kind of study the neuroscience of things, the study of stress, the study of performance. I think it all can be included and incorporated into the fire service in so many aspects, very similar to other, Fortune 500 or organizations that are doing these business skills that could really help the fire service. I think this aspect around mental performance could really assist the fire service and extend our longevity. I also have a podcast, Beneath the Helmet, which is a kind of a podcast for firefighters that we cover mind, body, and spirit. Everything beneath the helmet is what we talk about. And we're on episode number 15 right now and just launched in March. So it's amazing leaders that you get to see on there. I've been writing for Canadian Firefighter magazine and Firefighting Canada for over 10 years now, doing a regular column there. And then in 2021, I launched my own business called Silver Arrow Coaching and Consulting, where I work on high performers, beat burnout, and become more resilient leaders. I definitely have a real niche and specialty for working with firefighters and fire chiefs. So I'm very excited to be here today, and I enjoy the conversation. And please, like I think Dave and Sean both said, fire away questions. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Arjuna. Yeah, and for me too, guys, I'm just like you guys here today. I'm here to learn. I'm always learning. The interview process is changing, as you know. Like over the last 20 years, I could tell you the changes that I've noticed over 20 years is vast. A lot more emphasis on certain things today as opposed to 10 years ago. Some of the big things that are that seem to have a lot of focus today is diversity and stress. And actually, Forbes magazine ranked firefighters as the #1 stressful occupation in North America in 2015. And the second was military deployment to Afghanistan at the time. So it is a huge issue in the fire service. And I could probably say without a doubt that almost every fire department across Canada, North America, has individuals off on PTSD, on stress-related illness. So it is an issue, and that's why they bring it up in the interview now, in a variety of different types of questions. Everything from, describe to us what burnout is, what are things that you can do to avoid burnout, some behavioral-based questions. Just a very basic one is, can you tell us a time you were involved in stress and tell us how you dealt with it? Also, resiliency type questions, like how, you as a firefighter, can you tell us how you would be more resilient or how you can be more resilient? So there's a lot of different types of questions now amongst in regards to stress. So it's something that, I feel is a really good topic to discuss in our webinar. And certainly having two experts here today that I consider experts, for me, it's great education for me because I'm the one that's doing a lot of the mock interviews. And also for you guys that are preparing for the interview. So I'm just going to quickly bring up just our agenda here. Give me 1 second. So these are just I just wrote these things down very quickly. Some things that I like to cover here today with Arjuna and Dave. So Arjuna is going to talk a little bit about, the definition of stress, what stress is. And again, in interviews, they're going to ask definitions. It's something that's very common. I know Guelph just recently asked, what is burnout? And that's another thing, Arjuna, if you could touch on too, is maybe a little bit about the definition of burnout and ways that you, could avoid burnout in the fire service. Also, resiliency. What is resiliency? A lot of people get kind of thrown off by this question when they hear it in the interview because they don't really give it any context. They just said, can you tell us what you can do to be more resilient? And obviously they're referring to stress. But maybe if you could touch on resiliency, Arjuna, that would be great too. And ways to become more resilient in the fire service. If you want to go ahead, Arjuna, and start that off, that would be great.
Fantastic. Yeah, I just want to also shout out to Dave and Sean for hosting this today because I think it's a great proactive move is talking about this to our youngest and our newest recruits in the fire service. So stress. So I think for me, stress, I would say through my whole career, I always thought I was always stressed out. I thought it was a badge of honor to be stressed. It was kind of my responsibility to feel stress when I'm a firefighter, an officer, or a fire chief. That was kind of my role, was to be stressed. And as you know, I'm here today to say that's not the healthy lifestyle. And I think when we talk about stress, we talk about it kind of incorporates many things, and really stress is not just PTSD. It's not just trauma stress. For me, myself, and I think this is pretty new to a lot of people, is organizational stress is actually rising quicker and faster and more prominent through the fire service than traumatic stress is. Through trauma calls, we have a lot of training under our belts. on how to manage that, CASM teams, peer support teams, all these different avenues and resources, and the conversation as well. The conversation in the last 10 years has really changed about trauma aware, talking, dealing with members who are going through suicide or addiction, all these different things. But what I found was we're missing a huge component of organizational stress, and that is way more prominent than the trauma. And not to disregard any trauma, that is equally as nasty to our careers, but there's also an area that we really haven't paid a lot of attention to. And I think being a part of this today, you're going to have a leg up on the competition by understanding stress a little bit more, and that it's not just post-traumatic stress, it is also organizational stress. I think a very interesting term that you might want to investigate a little deeper is the term about moral injury. I think that is a term that, as a first responder, as a candidate, if you are aware of that kind of language as a moral injury, once again, you're going to be that much, you want to be one notch better than the last applicant. So what moral injury is in a real snapshot kind of definition is an injury to the soul, injury to the heart, injury to the person who's experienced decisions and actions that have gone against their morals and their values. So for myself, that was one key area that I experienced a lot of stress from, was moral injury. Moral injury by politicians, by other people above me. As I was the fire chief, I still had a number of people that I had to answer to and to work under. And a lot of things in the last number of years really went against my values, my integrity, what I stood for as a person. And you might think that's not the big deal, maybe one off here and there, but if you do that for 5-10 years, it actually is an injury, a stress injury, that is very, it's pretty nasty, because I would say that's what ended my career, was moral injury. So once again, something to kind of look into and maybe investigate a little bit more. I think anytime you're doing a conversation with maybe a potential department, or you're doing training with a candidate or anything like that, is to have that trauma aware language that you're using. So I think trauma aware language just means that you're kind of aware of what other people are, maybe their past lives, what they've experienced, and just be aware of how you're speaking to others. And once again, in an interview or something like that, having trauma aware and trauma focused language that you use during the interview, I really think could put you above the other people that you're surrounded with.
Can I throw in an example?
Please. Yeah.
So when Arjuna talks about moral injury, a classic example early on in my career, I went to a call where a woman answered the door, and we said, "Oh, did somebody call 911? We had an emergency." And she said, "Nope, nobody answered. Nobody called. And she tried to close the door, and we were confused. And and credit to my captain at the time, he said, "Ma'am, is there something we can help with?" And she said, "Nope." And she went to close it. I didn't realize, but she had a big red spot on the side of her face. And a guy yelled out from the back of the house, like, "Stacy, what are you doing?" And I didn't realize that this was an abusive situation. And as soon as my captain recognized it, he said, "Dave, we're going to stay here." And I didn't get it. And then he explained it to me, what's going on. I was raised by 4 women, 4 sisters. And I have a huge respect for women in general. So for me, that moral of respecting women was now in conflict. And when we eventually got in the door, I wanted to beat the shit out of this guy. And that would not have helped. But when we left the house, we ended up leaving, and I felt really awkward. And in a minor sense, that was an example of a moral injury for me. Same thing with dealing with calls with kids and stuff where you really value children's lives. So as you kind of go and explore this, I encourage you, I like Arjuna's point there, at least learn some of the lingo and understand how you embody that and how you process it. So at least you'll be dialed in when the time comes and they ask you some questions about how you take care of yourself.
Yeah, great example. Yeah, and I think today's, the opiate crisis that we're seeing, you're seeing, for those who are actual front firefighters at the moment, you may be seeing the same patient over and over and over again, who's overdosing. And that wears you down over time. That is, your morals are like, this is not aligned with my morals, and it does wear you down. Or you go to a child issue where the home is, obviously the child is in neglect. It's going to be hard for you to do. And if you do that for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, there is an impact on that. So, and I think stress just in general it is your nervous system firing just as it should. Stress is actually a good thing. There's eustress and there's de-stress. So eustress is the good stress that we have. So the stress that we need to perform well. When we're getting ready for an exam, we need a bit of a boost. We need some adrenaline going through us so we're alert. We're doing a combat challenge or a fire fit challenge. We need a bit of a boost to be ready. So that stress is good. It's when you get to the chronic stress that is nasty. So chronic stress or de-stress is when you are continually in that stress cycle and never having your body able to regulate and get back to a homeostasis, which is just a nice balanced state. And I'm not obviously not proud of this, but I'm very open about it now. I live in fight or flight mode for over 10 years. Over 10 years, I still did not recognize that I was in fight or flight. And fight or flight means, as probably most of you know, is that your fight response or your flight response or your freeze response from it could be even a imaginary hazard. It could be something you're just thinking about in your head. It does not necessarily have to even be a real danger that you're facing. And when you're in that continual chronic loop of stress, your body just starts to always be in hyperactivity, always starts to be on edge. And it's just not a healthy way to live. It causes all sorts of body issues, arthritis, chemical issues, hormone issues. So anytime that you're feeling stressed, it's super important to regulate yourself and bring you back down to a calm state, as we are in this room right now. And I think Dave's going to talk about a great technique later about how to bring yourself down in the moment really fast. And I have lots of tools in my toolbox that I use to now regulate myself from stress and to just come down from that state. I talk about it quite often, that very first time driving a fire truck 20 some odd years ago, my right leg would just shake like mad. Like it was just buzzing like that fast. And I never really thought much of it. It was always kind of, why is this happening? Am I nervous or what's going on? But when I got to the fire scene, I was cool as a cucumber. So now 20 some odd years later, I kind of recognized that was my body's way of dissipating that extra adrenaline and extra stress that was in my body about going to my first house fire, driving the fire truck. So it just kind of, at the moment, never thought anything of it. 20 some odd years later, I can put those two pieces together, that I was having a stressful moment, but my body helped me regulate that by shaking it out. So I think that's kind of stress in a nutshell. Dave, you have anything you want to add there?
Well, I think, we're going to end up talking about how to embrace it. If you think back to everybody here who has faced writing their first written exam for a fire department, and you're hyper vigilant, you're looking around, you're checking it out, everybody, they're all wearing their fire t-shirts, and when Arjuna talked about cool as a cucumber and that little recognition of what his exercise was, we'll talk about a bunch of exercises that you can do. But if you can get in tune with your body and know, okay, what is it? How do I present for myself? And then what do I do with it? That's really where it comes down to interviews. So you're going to look at, if you are any reflective kind of person. I know we have one person in the group who actually has an interview tomorrow. If you look at how you present, how stress embodies itself, how it comes out. Usually by labeling and identifying, you can say, oh, I can do something with it. It's kind of like going to the doc the first time the doctor can diagnose, oh, yeah, that's a sore knee. And you go, oh, that's a sore knee. Thank you. I can now do something with it. It's in this case, as soon as and we'll talk as the session goes on, once you identify what it is for you at that written test, walking into that interview, sitting across from that panel, all of a sudden you go, I'm okay. I got this. I can figure this out. So we'll throw more of those coming, but I think we're right on track, Arjuna. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that was good, Arjuna.
Good point about.
Sorry, go ahead, Arjuna.
Just a quick little thought there is the name it to tame it, right? Is that lingo out there to whatever you're feeling in your body, you can label it, name it, you're probably going to tame it. And one of the best reframes that I've ever heard of is instead of being, oh, I got an interview tomorrow, I'm nervous, say, I'm excited. So just that little bit of reframe turns your whole body that you're not actually nervous, you're not scared, you're excited about tomorrow, you're excited about writing this exam. And reframing is a powerful tool. And in coaching, that's what we use all the time is reframing. So people say, oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And just with a slight reframe, your whole mind and your body goes, oh, yeah, okay, that's not the big deal. And you can move on, right? So reframing from nervous to excited is a very powerful one.
Yeah, no, it's good. That's good, Arjuna. Yeah, sorry, Dave. Yeah, just one of the things I was going to mention. Yeah, those definitions are really good. The chronic stress that you kind of focused on, and of course, there's the acute stress is kind of like one single kind of moment in time, right, where you're hit with a stressful situation. I also liked what you talked about, and if you could just remind me, did you refer to it as moral stress? Is that what it was, or
moral injury?
Moral injury.
Moral injury is yeah, and there's a couple of great books out of it on moral injury for first responders. It's becoming more and more of a topic because people are actually understanding that it basically just used to be a military term. So people came back from war zones, battles, they'd come back and they'd have some sort of moral injury from maybe having to do some attack or something on a town that had more than just enemies, it had civilians in it or something like that, and there's consequences. And they would have to come back and wear that, and that's what they called was moral injury. But now they're finding that moral injury is just as prominent in the first responder community as well. So,
okay, interesting. Sorry, Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, an example for your context, Sean, and for the clients around the room today. Mm-hmm. When somebody asks you, what do you think would be the most difficult thing about being a firefighter? And if you, as a candidate, say something shallow like, well, shift work, well, get over it. Shift work's part of the job. But if you said something intellectual, like, most stressful thing about the job, well, I would imagine calls involving children, calls involving where my morals are being challenged because of something I'm seeing, where I might experience a moral injury, that people around the room are going to go, holy crap, this person gets it. Because when we talk about people who are on PTSD, like if they're going to invest $50,000 in your training, plus your prior training, then they're going to employ you at $50,000 to $100,000 a year. And suddenly at 5 years, they've got a couple of $100,000 into you and you've had a moral injury and you don't know what it is. And you're pissed off at the world and you come into work and you're angry. And all of a sudden you say, screw it, I'm booking off. And they lose you for 6 months. They've lost like probably $100,000 to $200,000 investment. If you return to the job, okay, cool. But if you come into the job with your eyes wide open, knowing I'm conscious that what will stress me out is a call involving a child that's abused. And I'm conscious that it could cause me a moral injury. So I have a couple of strategies on how to deal with that. And I'm kind of spoon feeding you here, but I'm just saying that in an interview, if I were to sit there and listen to an interview and somebody said, yeah, calls involving children would bother me, but here's how I would deal with it to avoid it bothering me beyond the acute stage and not becoming a chronic issue. Then I would think, okay, this person at least has an understanding of the emotional impact of acute stress.
Oh, yep, absolutely. Good point there, Dave. When you talk about a challenge, you always want to talk about what you're doing about it, right? So especially like just to key on what Dave said, If the challenge is that young children or children that are going to be in those situations that are going to be difficult to see, if that's going to be a challenge for you, you have to talk about what you can do, to meet that challenge, if you will. So it would have to do with stress management techniques, right? And that's kind of where maybe Arjuna, you could talk a little bit too, or even Dave. What are some stress management techniques that you guys have, or you guys would suggest in a variety of different scenarios, whether it's going to a structure fire or maybe the chronic stress or acute stress? What are some things that you guys would suggest that would be good stress management techniques?
Well, the first thing that pops on my mind is IQ. So stress IQ is kind of what I call it. And that's sort of what we're touching on today, is just understanding how your body reacts to stress, how your mind reacts to stress, just knowing more about the nervous system, the parasympathetic, the sympathetic, how that all operates, and I think everyone's different on how you respond to stress. It's not a cookie cutter. I'm different than how Dave responds to stress, but you have to know how your body, and I'm going to really say your body because it can be up in your mind, but your body's going to hold a lot of that tension, a lot of that stress. And you're going to have a lot of warning signs that your body or you are under stress. And without that stress IQ, kind of relating back to my story, I had numerous red lights flashing in my head saying, you got an issue here. Your back's hurting, your knees are you got pre-diabetes, all these different things are going through your system. You need to start doing something about this. And I ignored it for so many years before I actually had a vasovagal incident. So vasovagal is a syncope, is just an automatic nervous system shutdown. So I had this back 3 years ago, and I was at a fire event, and it was a hot summer day, and we were doing a little PT before our training weekend. So we had about 100 firefighters visiting our community from all over the province, and we were doing this full weekend training. And we thought we'd try this new aspect of doing some mindfulness and some exercise before class started, which I was all in favor of. Let's do it. But for myself, I kind of was prepared more for a mindfulness moment versus a CrossFit challenge that it turned out to be. And I wasn't ready for that. So my wife and I hadn't slept all night. Well, we did, but like it was a long night already. Got up in the morning. I had a cup of coffee. That's all I had. Went to this thing. And within about 30 minutes of doing these serious CrossFit challenges, I started to feel really lightheaded and dizzy. So I walked over to the side of the field, and everything started going white and fuzzy. I got ringing in my ears. It was kind of like I was in a dream. And then I'm on the ground, kind of unconscious for a bit, and then woke up a little bit and had my firefighters taking care of me, which was a surreal feeling to have my own firefighters putting an oxygen mask on me and taking care of me. And I realized after I went to the hospital, I thought I was having a heart attack. I thought that was the end of my life or the end of my career. Found out that all it was a vasovagal incident, which essentially means your nervous system was so overwhelmed, so just overtaxed, that it basically just turned me off and said, your nervous system cannot manage this any longer. So I don't equate it to just the PT part of it, the exercise part of it. I equate it to my dad being in the hospital, my dad trying to find assisted living, my mom passing away a couple of years before that from 23 days of cancer. I equate it to being a new fire chief. I equate it to being hosting this huge event with 100 firefighters. So all these different elements of stress that I was not taking care of, just added that little bit of exercise in there and dehydration from only having a cup of coffee, I was down and out. So no injury, nothing, no life-saving procedures or anything like that had to get done. But it happened a month later again. So once again in Victoria, I was at a concert, and same kind of thing happened again, and boom, I was back in the hospital, and once again, a vasovagal incident. And at that point on, I was like, all right, my body, my nervous system, I have not been doing a very good job at. And pretty much from that day on, I've been studying and living a life where my nervous system is healthier. So right off the bat, I would say stress IQ. So knowing more about your body, how it reacts. Hydration. I gotta say, hydration for your nervous system is so critical. I thought I drank a lot of water before, and now I'm drinking probably 3 times the amount of water I was drinking as a fire chief. Less coffee, more water. Less alcohol. Not that I was a heavy drinker, but reducing that as much as possible is definitely a benefit. People think alcohol helps you sleep. So if you're stressed out, you want to sleep more. Alcohol does not make you sleep more. It passes you, it lets you pass out, but it does not allow you to sleep better. Sleep. I would have to say sleep is so up there. If you could start anything, I would say drink water and start sleeping more. And not in a lazy way, but in a recovery way. So in a way that you are taking care of yourself. So when you put your head down the pillow, you're out and you're getting some good restorative sleep, because that's really where all this change in your body occurs. That's where you get to rewire your memories. That's where your body starts to recover. So for me, I blacked out my whole bedroom. I've made my bedroom more into what we call a sanctuary almost, where it's where we sleep. That's kind of it. It's dark. It's cool. I actually took black tape and marked out all the electrical components in the room just so there was no green VCR, or not VCR. We don't have those anymore, do we? Satellite dishes or whatever, cable boxes, TV lights, all those things. Cell phone doesn't buzz. It's just a nice, calm, cool room where you can have some good sleep. So I would say those 2 things right off the bat. If you can drink water, more, hydrate your body, because your nervous system really likes water. It works well when it's hydrated and got lots of fluid. And sleep. If you could knock those 2 out of the park, you're going to be light years ahead of the competition for sure. But there's so many other things like supplements, testing. Like I think I did a lot of hormone testing, a lot of blood testing, make sure that my body was optimal where it had to be to regain out of burnout, but also to continue in a healthy cycle. For practices, I would say I'll give a couple more and then I'll pass it over to Dave, is breathing techniques. I use the 4-7-8 breathing technique, which is one of my favorites. So it's in for 4, hold for 7, and out for 8. And the real key to this is the long exhale. So the long exhale actually brings your body into the parasympathetic state, which is your calm and relaxed state, your rest and digest state. If you breathe or if you exhale shorter than your inhale, you're actually making your body more awake, which might be good for, like I said, if you're going to get ready for a combat challenge or something like that. You actually want your body a little bit more alert, a little bit more energized, and you actually reverse that breathing technique. So your exhales are actually shorter than your inhales. But if you're trying to calm down from stress, you're about to go into the test tomorrow, for whoever that is in the room is going to go write their test or have an interview tomorrow. A little breathing exercise just prior to that will definitely help you come down to a nice calm state. And then kind of going off my story about my shaken leg, I found this modality a couple of years ago called TRE, which is tension trauma release exercises. And TRE is, when I went and did it, it was part of my modalities to, I basically was a guinea pig when I was going through burnout. I wanted to try anything under the sun to see how I could re-regulate my nervous system. And when I tried TRE, I would say after the first or second session, I considered myself on the road to recovery just from practicing TRE. And what it is real simple 7 exercises that you do that fatigue your core fight or flight muscles. So right from your ankles to your lower back. And what that does, once you fatigue those through these exercises, you lay on the ground and you actually start tremoring and shaking, just like my leg was when I was going to that structure farm. And through going through the TRE session, you're actually shaking out any past trauma, any past stress, tension within your body in a safe environment where you can bring your body from a sympathetic, which is a fight or flight response, into homeostasis within 15 minutes. of doing the exercise. So I became a certified provider of TRE about a year ago, or 2 years ago now. And now my plan is basically to make sure the fire service and other first responders know about the power of TRE and how, like, I really honestly, I want every firefighter to try TRE once. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you, great. But I think everyone should try, because I think it's one of those modalities that, and it's a self-care tool. So once I teach you how to do it, you have that tool for the rest of your life to rebalance your nervous system. And I've used it plenty of times going up on stage prior to a public speaking event or presenting at a workshop. I go into the washroom, I'll do a quick little 5-minute shake, and my whole nervous system is back in balance. And I can walk into that room calm, cool, and collected. Okay. So that was a whole bunch there. I'll pass it off to Dave and see what we can bounce off each other.
Sorry, I'm only laughing because, you look around any room, anybody who's gone through some shit and made a decision, I'm not going to be a victim of it. I'm going to dive into it. I'm going to learn as much as I can. I'm going to figure this out, whether that's repairing an engine, fixing your car, or learning how to do a sport. You have done that with stress. Like, I'm listening to you, and honestly, your information's up here. Your information's most people, like when Sean and I hear this question during interview practice, or when I hear it during interviews, how do you handle stress? Most people throw out, I work out, I walk my dog, I play guitar, I talk to my parents, my girlfriend, or my boyfriend. And that's all kind of easy, low-hanging fruit.
Whereas, level.
Yeah, so I please don't take my humor as I'm actually laughing because I think this is awesome. You're working at a much higher level that I too would agree the fire service needs to be at. So while we have good gyms and we have good, and like, I'll give you an example. I started doing yoga for first responders, and I am not the yoga guy. I'm the guy who used to run marathons and would love doing CrossFit and throw kettlebells. And I got a sandbag over there that I haven't touched in almost a year. But my point is that I now too realize I need to take care of the cognitive side. So for me, my exercises, I would agree, number one is get a handle on my sleep. That's changed my life. Now that I understand in the 24-hour clock, the human body and the human brain needs 30% of that time to recharge and restore. So that equals roughly 8 hours. And I used to be the guy that said, I'll sleep when I'm dead. And now I'm looking at it as, no, I'm going to sleep and so I too sleep with the window open. I make sure the temperature is 2 degrees less, even in the wintertime, because I researched after having trouble sleeping. I was like, all right, what puts your body into that restful state? 2 degrees of Celsius less than normal, blocking out all blue light. I try to not look at my phone at night because the blue light activates the back of your brain, which activates a hormone in your body to tell you, hey, buddy, stay awake. So I find that your points here are really, they're resonating with me. I wish I had learned them 20 years ago at the start of my career.
I wish I did too. Yeah, for sure. Because I love the fire service and I'm sure I'd still be there. But what I'm finding now is I truly thought the fire service was my calling. And now in this second transition, I call it my encore career. I kind of feel this is my true calling, is to share this knowledge with people, right? So
right on. Yeah. So look, for those around the table, I would say treat it at 2 different levels. What is your superficial level of managing stress on a day-to-day basis? Whether that is I exercise, I walk the dog, I talk to my folks, I have a friend that I vent with. Maybe it's guitar, maybe it's, I don't know, knitting with your grandmother. But I think then, to Arjuna's point and mine, go above that and answer the question about, I manage stress in long term by taking care of my sleep, by making sure that I check in with people who are especially close to me. Like, I have a checkup. I personally have a checkup from the neck up once a year with a psychologist. We talk about whatever's stressing me out over the course. And sometimes it's a checkup from the neck up, happens twice a year. On the moment of stress, besides the sleep and besides the stuff, I use breathing. And so if you were to compare, if you're thinking back right now going, Arjuna used that word sympathetic nervous system, and you're thinking to yourself, holy crap, I haven't heard that since grade 11 fitness class. Think of it as you and I, we all as humans have a gas pedal. And based on the information that comes in through our eyes, our ears, our nose, our skin temperature, anything that we see as a threat, our body processes it quickly in the head. And through two little nuggets of tissue called your amygdala, it drops a signal down to your kidneys, which are down here. And on the kidney is your adrenal gland. And it says, holy crap, I perceived a threat, put on the throttle, gas it up, rock and roll. And things that happen are your heart rate increases when the adrenaline is released. And we all know this. Adrenaline releases, your adrenaline goes in and opens up your airway so that their air can go in back and forth easier. And the pipes, your arteries constrict so that it can feed your major muscle groups better. It can handle a fight or flight that Arjuna referred to earlier. The weird thing is, all these things happen before your interview, before your written test. They also coincidentally happen when you read a social media text. They also happen when somebody calls you and you're looking at the phone going, oh my God, this is my boss calling me. I'm like stressed out. All of that happens in a millisecond. The electrical signal goes at literally 300 kilometers an hour from your brain to your adrenaline, and then it dumps into your body. So my point is, how do you control it? Well, if the adrenaline is the gas pedal or the throttle, you got to learn how to work the brake pedal. And the brake pedal is breathing. So when I'm stressed in the moment, and Sean and I've worked together for 28 years, he's seen me in command at calls. One of the first things I do is I inhale through the nose. And I exhale through the mouth 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 seconds. So I'm like 3 on the inhale, 10 on the out. That is the brake pedal that tells the part of the brain and part of the heart, hey, slow down. Slow down. Whatever's going on, you have more control of this than you think you do. If you want to be the person who rides the front seat of the roller coaster and goes, yeehaw, awesome, great, run the throttle all the time. But that will burn out. And what he said earlier was, you will ride that all the time, up and down. And every time you get a text message, phone call, a contact with the city, run into the deputy chief at the grocery store, and your heart rate goes up. Or you can be the person who's in the second or back seat of the roller coaster that's steering it, that's changing your breathing patterns. So I just gave you the 3-10 model of inhale and exhale for 10. You can do the 4-7-8. So inhale for 4, hold, 6, 7, exhale. Either way, they engage the opposite of the throttle. They engage what's called the parasympathetic nervous system, the brake. So I do that a lot before I key the radio and say something stupid on the radio. I do that before, sometimes when I have people barking at me, like we were at a house fire and somebody was yelling at me and they were screaming, and I looked at them and I went, I recognize that. Your skin's red. Your words are all over the place. Your focus is not here. Your eyes are darting. You're in fight or flight. And then I kept myself calm and I said, sir, could you step over here? And I have my pump operator. He's going to talk to you. We're going to go fight the fire. So I use that technique, Sean, and I'll pass it back to you now. But yeah. I use I use that technique to kind of slow down, to say, hey, I've got control of myself, which means that I can make better decisions. And like, they're well talked. If any of you, look, you all have your phone handy, do me a favor, open up YouTube, type in "Lose Yourself" Eminem. Watch the first 90 seconds. And if you can recognize the 8 things that he says about going up on stage and rapping and having vomit on his sweater from his mother's spaghetti and losing his breath and losing his words and word stop, if you can recognize those 8 things, you understand what we're talking about tonight. Anyway, Sean, back to you, man.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Thanks, Arjuna. I'm going to just kind of bring it back to the interview now, and more specifically, some interview questions, and put it a little bit more into context, specifically into the firefighter interview. So some of the questions, one of the questions that they ask in the firefighter interview, it could be worded a few different ways, but the intent is still the same thing. But working as a firefighter means responding to calls that are stressful in nature. Can you tell us how you would deal with stress on the job so it doesn't affect your personal life? That is a pretty common question, worded differently a lot of times. But, some of the things that, and I'm just talking from my experience, that, when I go to a call and it's stressful in nature, one of the things that, that I do to kind of help with the stress during the call or even before the call is just knowing my job inside and out. So, and it's a really good opportunity for you to sell yourself on your work ethic, on your your motivation, dedication to the job. So if you are a volunteer firefighter and maybe you're talking, you could use those examples in there as well. But even just talking to just knowing your job inside and out. So just knowing, if you're talking about, say, maybe going to a call where you have to do CPR or on a DSA patient, or maybe a 6-month-old. If you know your job inside and out, and there's no second guessing anything, and on the way to the call, you're thinking to yourself, okay, the first thing I'm going to do when I get there, I know it, I'm confident, and you're kind of building your confidence as you're going. That in itself is a really good for me. And I noticed that at calls, and you can see it at calls too. And I'm sure Dave and Arjuna has been there too. Just simple calls where you have to put the pump into gear, and putting the pump into gear, in all honesty, it's a very simple thing to do. A monkey could do it, but for whatever reason, you get to the call and you'll see that some people can't do it. And one of the reasons that I think of is that when you train, it's very similar to like hockey or to sports, where when you do something over and over and over again, it becomes almost muscle memory. So when you get to a call and there is a fire, there's people trapped and everyone's yelling. I've been at calls where people are coming into the truck that are pulling me out of the truck, screaming at me. You revert back to your muscle memory, almost, so to speak, where if you know your job inside and out, it's just you put the stress aside, you focus on checking the boxes, and you're going through the process. So I think knowing the job is a very important thing to talk about. Another one is just being able to talk to people after a call that's stressful in nature. So, talking to your captain, talking to other firefighters about the call. If it's something that might be very specific that no other firefighter at that specific call maybe did, and yours is kind of a unique situation, reaching out to maybe another firefighter that might be off duty and talking to them about a specific situation that you might have been in as well. They say physical fitness, and I know that's kind of the low-lying fruit, Dave, but they do say physical fitness is a very important one. But you're right, though, it is very down low. But as far as new recruits coming up and not being exposed to a lot of the stress, that physical fitness is I swear by it. It's something that I've been doing for years, and going into the gym and then leaving, I just feel like my mind is clear, focused, and I just feel like 110%. So the physical fitness part of it, I think, is an important thing too. But in that type of question too, understanding, the process within the fire service. So being able to understand that, maybe Peterborough Fire Service, their process or their mental health or their traumatic TMS, traumatic mental, what do we call it?
Mental stress.
Traumatic mental stress. The policies are very important too. So understanding what the policies are. So for example, we do have debriefings where firefighters are trained in debriefings, and they're called to the scene. They're called to, to debrief, a crew. So understanding that and requesting that during a call that might be stressful is one way to kind of deal with the stress on the job. informal tailboard discussions is another really good one. It's just coming back from the call and just talking about what happened, talk about what you did. You might not know the entire situation about what everybody did, how it started, how it ended. But when you start talking about the situation and what everybody did and what the involvement was, maybe the background, in all honesty, that is something that really helps deal with the stress, because it kind of builds a little bit of confidence at the same time, knowing that everybody did everything they could do. But that's just like an informal debriefing. You know, again, exercise is good, but some things to do at home, like, oh, sorry, let me get back to the policy. So employee assistance program, EAP, is another one that's very important. So being able to go to the employee assistance program, they could give you direction on some of the maybe a psychologist, psychiatrist, some ways of getting help outside of the fire service as well. They're very good for that. Even like when you go home, and even though like when I ask this question, a lot of people just focus on the work things, right? Which is very important, but there's a lot of things that you can do outside of work that will affect how you deal with stress on the job. And it's a healthy life balance. And it's what Arjuna was talking about sleep, about eating well, all that kind of stuff. And making, you know, are you the type of person that, you know, is going to be a paramedic part-time? You're going to be a volunteer firefighter part-time? Are you going to be doing, you know, working 7 days a week in a construction? Like those things there is where you end up not having that balance. And those are people that tend to, I'm going to say, over time, and it doesn't happen right away. It happens 10, 15 years down the road, have issues with stress because they don't have that healthy work-life balance. So I really think that's something that you really want to talk about, because it's something that I know the interview panel isn't, that they're not interested in. They don't want someone that's coming in the fire service that wants to work full-time somewhere else. That's not what it's about. That 24-hour shift, the whole reason that was designed is a circadian rhythm. It had to do with sleep patterns, has to do with stress, all that kind of stuff. And that time that you have off is so important to recoup, come back to work, and you're ready to go. So HR is in the room. HR is very concerned about this right here. That's all they're concerned about. Don't think for a second they're concerned about you, because they're not. They're concerned about the bottom dollar. And it's true. That's their main concern. So they want to make sure that you understand stress and that you have the right lifestyle, if you will. So they don't want to hear things like you're going to work, you know, part-time as a paramedic, or you're going to work full-time, you know, as a construction business and stuff like that. They want to make sure that when you're off, you're spending time with your family, you're spending time with your friends, you're getting great sleeps, you're recuperating, and when you come back to work the next day, you're ready to go. That is the type of person they want to hire, because down the road, 15, 20 years down the road, that's the person that's going to be able to deal with a lot of that stress that happens on a day-to-day basis as a firefighter. But even at home, when you're at home, talking even about, and again, a little bit more low-lying fruit as well, what Dave was mentioning, but talk about some interesting hobbies you have. Those are really good things to get out. It kind of shows yourself as a three-dimensional person. It shows that you have other interests. It's a stress management technique as well. Even if it's stamp collecting, playing guitar, all those types of things are great. Coaching sports, volunteering in the community, all those things are fantastic. And it gives you an opportunity to talk, maybe if you have a family, a wife, kids, that kind of stuff. It all ties back into the whole stress management thing. Any additions there, Arjuna or Dave? Does that make sense? Or
yeah. No, I think you're really good. And if I were to take a question, if I were being a member on a panel, the way you organize that by saying, look, here's how I handle the stress at the call, here's how I handle the stress after the call, and here's how I handle the stress when I'm off duty.
Yeah,
like that was great. You kind of grouped everything, and it would help me see, oh yeah, he gets it. Knowing my job, being really competent, being able to understand that I'm part of a team. It's not all on me. Understanding that I could do a diffusing or a debriefing or a around the fire hall tailboard chat, or I could be on shift when I'm off duty. I could access EAP, or I could do my workout. Like those are great points. And frankly, I think when somebody's got those organized in their head and they spit them out and they're honest, and you can say, yeah, this is what I do for my workouts. I run, I do weights, I do functional fitness, I do golf, if that's it. Those are all key points. So I think the way you organized that was good.
Good. Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, and some of the other questions that come up too, of course, one of the ones comes up is, can you tell us what stress is and tell us some of the things that you do to manage your stress? And we kind of cover the stress management part already, like with those things. But understanding stress is really important. Just going back to what Arjuna said, is that IQ is very important, that you understand your body. I know for myself, when I start to get overwhelmed, and not so much stress, but I guess, yeah, it is part of stress. When you get overwhelmed, for me, I start to breathe a little bit heavier. I start to try to get more air in my body for some reason. I just have a hard time catching my breath. And for me, that's a signal that, I am in that, getting to that point, that stress. So, I mean, in some answers, you may use that and say, I recognize when stress is in my body. I recognize when it's impacting me. So some of the things that I do to manage my stress are, and then you could talk about some of the things that you do. But definitely understanding stress, defining stress, whether it's acute, chronic, and what we learned today is moral injury. Those are really important terms to, tell the Navy panel that you understand those things and things that you're doing to kind of, deal with those on a day-to-day basis. But one of the behavioral-based questions, and it's very general, that I'll talk about is, can you tell us a time where you were in a stressful situation? Sometimes they might say, tell us how you coped with it. Sometimes they won't. But if you're in the last webinar I did on behavioral-based interviewing, all behavioral-based interviewing is based on competency. So even though they don't ask that second part, and it's just tell us a time where you're involved in a stressful situation, they still want the competency, and the competency is where all the marks are. And in that competency, you have to be able to read into it that it's your ability to manage stress effectively. And that's the most important part of the answer. So of course, you're going to go through all the STAR format: situation, task, action, result, with a focus on that stress management. And like what Dave mentioned before about the organization of, how you deal with stress before a call, how do you deal with stress during a call, after a call, and then even as a maintenance phase after the call. So when you get a call or a question like, tell us a time when you were in a stressful situation, I know a lot of you guys out there are volunteers, but you don't have to be. This template really works with all jobs or anything, is that, and I'm going to use a volunteer firefighter, for example, a page comes in, it says 6-month-old, it's VSA. Everybody's going to have an issue with that. Like there's going to be, everyone's going to have a level of stress because it's an infant, because it's a young child, and it's a VSA. We know what we're going to encounter. We're going to encounter parents that are going to be absolutely hysterical, very upset, right? So when we first get that call and we're on the way to the call, it's very important in situational or behavioral-based interviewing, in that situation, that you're describing what the dispatcher is saying specifically and how you're responding to it. And different ways to respond to it, as Dave or even Arjuna suggested, breathing techniques is one way to deal with that on the way to the call. Yep.
There's two other ways to throw into that. One is mental rehearsal. Yeah. Which, if you think any of you have swung a golf club without holding a club, or if any of you have thrown a basketball, or you've rehearsed what your physical actions are, that degree of mental rehearsal is working at a much higher level of performance, similar to Olympic and pro athletes. Spec ops or spec forces do it all the time. When they do formation of who's in the stack before they enter into a door, they visualize through first person point of view, where am I in the stack? Who's going through who's breaching the door? Who's going left? Who's going right? Who's going down the center? They all have a role. And when you do your mental rehearsal, saying, I practice mental rehearsal in CPR of an infant, I practice, where is the bag? Where is the bag valve mask? Where, what will we be doing for CPR rhythms? Do I see myself doing resuscitation standing or kneeling? So when you rehearse that is one powerful tool. If you are interested in learning more about mental rehearsal, Google visualization for athletes on YouTube. You'll see a soccer player in a white shirt, and it is a whole program. The guy talks about 5 to 10 things that top athletes do around mental rehearsal, and he's a PhD psychology student who's spun into stuff on YouTube. The other thing I would suggest that people can look at is something called segmenting or chunking. And again, we have all done this, whether you were writing a paper or doing a task, instead of, actually, if any of you are volunteers and you've been to a house fire, you have segmented. An incident commander segments where you look at, all right, what needs to happen in the next 60 seconds? What needs to happen in the next 60 seconds? And what needs to happen after that? So segmenting is a cognitive process that people do when they're knowing they're going to be in a high stress environment, and they break it down into what is my next physical task, whether it's a physical task or the next 60 seconds. They look at, okay, go open up the roll-up door. Okay, reach in. And they physically will say it to themselves. Dave, reach into the cabinet. Dave, grab the irons. Dave, walk over to the door. Those are two powerful examples, and you'll see them. Conor McGregor does a phenomenal job of them both. He does mental rehearsal right down to the point that he hires guys who look like his opponent, and he tells them, study my opponent's moves and mimic them in the ring. So he rehearses, and then he does live simulations. So anyways, you'll see that on the YouTube. If I've described it, I've probably watched it over 200 times. So the guy who captures all the top athletes does a really good piece on mental rehearsal and segmenting.
I'll try to put a link to that on the YouTube channel, Dave.
Okay.
That's good.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, and that was my next point too, is one of the things I like to do, like if I'm going to call, the first thing I think of, and you get that structure fire, you get people trapped and your stress levels going through the roof. One of the things I do is just like Dave said, is that mental rehearsal. The first thing I just think of is, okay, all I want to know is the first 30 seconds when I arrive, I'm taking command, I'm giving the scene size up, I'm telling, the crews what I see, sides of the building, how is it 2 stories? Is it residential? Is it commercial? So in my head, I do a quick rehearsal. Once I get that down, for me, my heart rate and my stress level drops because I know the first 30 seconds I got it. There's no issue. And then once I'm there, everything else kind of just falls into place, right? The first truck on is attack, search. Second truck in is going to be RIT. Third truck in is going to be water supply. All that kind of stuff just comes bang, 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 bang. But for me, the first, 30 seconds of that call allows me to de-stress or to gain that confidence, right? But I really like what Dave said about that segmenting. I think that's exactly what I'm doing, and I never even realized that. But that's also mental rehearsal, but part of it's segmenting, because when you get there, you're going to deal with the next part of it, right? But so that's good. On the way to the call, you want to talk about the dispatches that are coming in and the things that you're doing, to deal with the stress, right? And if you're in the back of the truck, it could be, your captain's telling you, hey, I want you to do the patient assessment. Maybe your partner is going to look after the bags. I'm going to look after the parents. So right away, what you're doing is you're going through, like Dave said, you're looking through, what is CPR? If it's a child, we're going to be doing a young child. We're doing 15 to 2. If it's an adult, 30 to 2. And you're just kind of going through your head. But what's really important is in your answer in the interview, I can't stress enough, is that you've got to be detailed about it, so that you have to say specifically what those numbers are, because it proves that you're not panicking. When you panic, which is the opposite of kind of managing your stress at a call, you're doing the opposite of what you're supposed to do. So when you're telling them that this is what you're doing and this is how you're managing your stress, the specifics afterwards have to be correct. So for example, you get to the call. When you go into the, you would describe, going in, parents yelling, screaming. You want to kind of give that whole idea of how stressful that is. So that's really important in your storytelling, is to really build that story up so that the interview panel has a visualization of how stressful that is. So maybe you're in charge of doing the patient assessment. The mother gives you the baby. You look at the baby. Maybe you're talking, okay, it's bluish gray, appears to be BSA. Of course, this is stressful. The way that I deal with the stress, I revert back to my training, or it's like muscle memory. To me, that is the most important part. If you know your job inside and out, it's very easy to, I wouldn't say easy to do, but it's something that comes automatically, is that after doing these calls for years, you just put everything aside. You zone out completely and you focus on your training, exactly what you have to do. But to prove that you're doing the right thing, you have to be very specific afterwards. Like for example, the first thing I did is I checked the airway. Second thing I checked was for breathing. The patient wasn't breathing. I checked circulation. There's no pulse. I told my partner to put an airway in. We inserted an airway. We started delivering 2 breaths. My partner was on compressions. We were doing 15 to 2. So when you start talking about the specifics, it's showing them that you reverted back to your training and you did the correct thing and you didn't panic, like not being able to put that pump into gear when you get to a call, right? So it's kind of proof that you're doing the right thing. And at the same time, when you're talking about the details, you're selling yourself on a skill, whether it's CPR, pump operations, whatever the case is, you're selling yourself on specific skills. So then after the call, maybe you go back in the ambulance and you might talk about that scenario going back to the hospital. Maybe doing an informal debriefing with just the EMS, the paramedics back at the hospital, going back to the fire hall, doing an informal debriefing with the crews there and explaining a little bit about what you talked about. Or it could be a formal debriefing where they bring in firefighters the next day to do a debriefing. Even post-incident critiques are great stress management techniques too, knowing what everybody did, that kind of stuff. But at the very end of it is just getting back to your regular routine, like getting up in the morning, going back to your normal job, going back to your job at 7 a.m., coming home, coaching hockey, going to the gym, whatever you do, getting back in your regular routine. That is very important, I think, to move on and to manage that stress. So if you look at a template, it's kind of like on the way to the call, at the call, after the call, and after the call, kind of a maintenance thing, if you will. That's kind of the template that I use, and it can be used in anything. It doesn't have to be firefighting. It could be if you're working in the construction industry, if you're working on heavy equipment and something breaks down and you have a time delay and you have to kind of troubleshoot that piece of equipment. You're reverting back to your training, you're reverting back to your experience and things like that, right? So I do think that template works right across the board. But when it comes to behavioral-based interviewing, pick a story that is going to be relatable to the fire service, whether it's construction, heavy equipment, paramedic, something hands-on, volunteer firefighting, wildland, confined space rescue, something that's going to sell yourself. Any Arjuna or Dave, any thoughts on that one? Or
Oh no, I think you're covering it well. A lot of my clients that I work with, I do visualization. I'm a trained functional imagery coach. And some of the best outcomes that I've seen have been from when people sit with me and they run through the whole, maybe they're going into a board meeting and they stress to the nines, they don't want to talk to their management team or anything like that, or there's drama going on or labor relations. And they'll actually walk through the whole thing from opening the door to sitting down, what they see when they sit down, just the whole process. And when that time does come and that meeting happens, their brain is recognizing it as something that already happened. Because when you imagine it, your body and your mind thinks it's already happened. So if you want to do that prior to an interview, you're going to walk into an interview, you can answer all the questions, you can see who's in the room, you can feel the temperature, everything like that. And actually, when you sit down in that interview panel, it's going to be like you've already done it once. So it's going to be a huge load off your shoulders by just visualizing that, because your brain does think that has already happened and you're
Arjuna,
safe. Arjuna,
great. Sorry to cut you off, Arjuna. A great way to do that is through a mock interview too, right? I think that
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
mock interview, and that could be with family, friends, that could be with anybody. But just sitting down and going through that process is a huge difference for sure.
Yeah. There was a recent study that came out, and this is the kind of thing for the folks around the table who are still hanging in. They've been able to identify that people who go into a situation that is potentially filled with traumatic stress with a lower heart rate, because they have done exercises to control it, are more likely to not develop post-traumatic stress.
Is that right?
So through visualizing, through rehearsal, through mental rehearsal, through breathing techniques, I think there's a lot of power to it. This 3 pounds of mass that's in between our ears, we have huge amount of control over it. And like I said, you can either be the person who's riding up in the front seat of the roller coaster and experiencing the thrill of it and also the impact of it, or you can be the person who's in the back seat driving it and controlling it. So that rehearsal that you spoke of with family, friends, absolutely. You'll find even telling people, could you put on a white shirt and a black tie, make it look like you're the fire chief interviewing me? Tell your brother, your mom, your dad to do that, and people will go, really? And you're going to go, I know it sounds crazy, but I need to rehearse what it's like walking into a room with a bunch of people with white shirts and black ties.
Yeah, No, for sure.
And frankly, I worked with some MMA fighters, and we actually did the scope. Like, so when Arjuna was talking about rehearsing what it was like, the MMA fighters, we were Googling what the location looked like where they were competing. And we talked, and we then YouTubed what, so we did the Google Street View. We also YouTubed what the inside of the building looked like. And we also anticipated what the setting was, like the sounds, the smells. And those are all minor factors that when you look at it, so like the person that's in the room today, if they are thinking that I know what council chamber looks like, I know what the smell of the carpet looks like, or the smell of the carpet because it was just installed, so you'll have that fresh carpet smell, you're going to go into the interview more confident and less stressed. So I really encourage you, don't just, if you're that candidate who gets the invite for the interview and you go, yeah, I'll Google it the morning of, oh, you are so lost. But if you can Google it 2 days before, do a drive-by, go to the hotel the night before, or do it, or even ask somebody, hey, can I do a walk around in the station? All those things will ease your angst or your anxieties and prepare you to perform on the day of your interview.
Good. Thanks, Dave. Guys, before we move on, does anybody have any questions about the stress component? Nobody has any questions. I'd like to move on to specifically, I know, Arjuna, you spoke about burnout. And one of the things about burnout in the way that I understand it, and you could, and I'll pass off to you, Arjuna, but I see it in the paramedic service a lot where they're responding to the opioid crisis and they're going there 3, 4, 5 times a day, and sometimes for the same person 3 or 4 times. And it's just over and over again. And it's a feeling of not getting anything done or not helping. And it's just, there's no reward at the end of it. Like, you're not making a difference, so to speak, and you're just being overcome by call after call after call, same thing over and over again. And you're seeing it a lot with the paramedics, I find, because you're seeing a huge turnover with the EMS in these areas where there is a lot of this opioid crisis. But Arjuna, I'd like you to just maybe speak to burnout, specifically the definition and ways to avoid burnout, specifically for firefighters coming into it. And yeah, maybe and then also, I know we spoke on resiliency a little bit, but maybe if you could just maybe speak about resiliency definition, and I know we talked about ways to be resilient because it's very much similar to stress management, right?
Sure, for sure.
Okay.
So burnout, that is essentially why I left the fire service, was due to burnout. And that was my, I don't point fingers that the fire service burnt me out, and I don't point fingers at myself that I burnt myself out. It was a two-way street. It definitely, the organization had a role to play in it by overtaxing me. And then I had a role in playing on that where I didn't take care of my own well-being. So what burnout essentially is, to boil it down, is chronic stress that you do not take any measures to reduce. So it's stress that just builds up over the years. And burnout really doesn't happen. Like some people say, oh, I had a crazy week, I'm burnt out. Or this week's been so crazy at work, I'm burnt out. And that's not really burnout. Burnout is something that's been festering, being a long, brewing mismanagement of stress. And like I said before, my burnout cycle was probably a good 10 years in the burning. And there's plenty of times that it just goes unnoticed and you just keep driving harder and harder. And I'm assuming most people in this session today are people that are maybe prone to burnout. And I say that only because burnout it affects those high performers. It affects those go-getters. It affects those ones that want to excel in life and a career. It affects those ones that want to work, those ones that essentially breathe fire. I was one of those people where I lived and breathed fire, and now I have a different lens on it where you need a balance in life. So burnout essentially is your nervous system coming to a point where you are no longer functioning at the way you should be. Your hormone levels are out of whack, your nervous system's fried, and you're not going to be able to sleep. You're not going to be able to perform. You're not going to be able to think. You're going to have brain fog, low energy, fatigue. All these things are going to be pretty obvious, and you'll probably get sick a lot more. So your immune system will be probably shot. So like I said, burnout's something you're probably not going to see for 10 years, if it's not managed. If you manage it, we all should be able to escape burnout. With some stress IQ, some body IQ, just having some awareness of how we react to stress and actually doing some preventative, proactive measures to beat that burnout. So some ways that can get you into trouble for burnout is no self-care. So no self-care would be all the things we've been talking about for the last hour about, breathing, exercise, hydration, nutrition, all these different things, life balance. If that's out of whack, pretty much guaranteed to be on the track for burnout. A yes person. So I was a yes person, and not in regards to a yes man like you hear all the time of whatever you say, I'll do. I was a yes person because I was one of those go-getters. I was one of those people that was a high achiever, and I wanted to, every opportunity that came my way, I want to say yes to. And I think that's a great asset to have, but sometimes you have to say no. Mm-hmm. And no is a complete sentence, and it's something that we should embrace more. No. And it's not necessarily like I'm not kind of squashing any high performers or high achievers. I think those are our leaders, really. Those are the people that we see and we admire. But without any self-care, that yes person is going to be burnt out sooner or later down the road. When you take work over everything else. So like Sean was saying, you're working 24 and then you start another career and you're working around the clock. So really you're working, maybe 100 hours a week versus what we should be working, right? So when we take work priority out of how it should be and our life balance is out of whack, that's going to get us in trouble as well. I like to call it life harmony, because balance is pretty hard to actually get balance in life. No matter what, in the fire service, you're going to be pulled in one direction more than the other. So some weeks it might be you got a couple of courses, you got an exam prep, you got an officer's promotion, you got whatever that looks like, a bunch of overtime shifts. You might be leaning more towards your work balance. And if you stay in that, once again, you're on that path to burnout. If you can come back the following week and have more family time, more hobby time, more vacation time, that's where the harmony is. So it's pretty hard to stay totally in center, balanced with life and work. So we're always going to have tugs and pulls, different directions. So if we can just remember that we can't always stay in that work mode. We have to have some time to defrag, is what I call it, and turn off, defrag, turn off, and reset your body, your nervous system. It's just going to make your longevity in the fire service so much longer and happier. So essentially your body in burnout is being overwhelmed. That's the biggest thing. Overwhelmed. If you can say that in your interviews that you're using these tactics to prevent stress, prevent burnout, I'm using these tactics to prevent my overwhelm of all the things that we have to learn as firefighters. We have to be the jack of all trades. We have to know so much that we didn't have to know 30, 40 years ago. And I'm prepared for that because I've been training, I've been doing my visualization, I've been doing my self-care, and I am on the path to a healthy career versus burning out early, is kind of the mindset that you should be portraying. So that's kind of burnout in a nutshell. It's not classified in the DSM, which is, off the top of my head, is short for something with regarding the mental health and all the criteria there around anxiety, depression, PTSD. Burnout is not classified as an occupational injury. It is becoming more and more popular in the sense of being more talked about as a potential occupational injury down the road, because they're seeing changes in the last 5 years. And WHO, which is the World Health Organization, has now addressed it and noticed it as being a potential epidemic across the world of burnout. So it's on the radar. People are listening. People are talking about it more. That's kind of my mission, because I felt that burnout and stress management was not talked about nearly enough as traumatic stress was through my fire service career. So my fire service career was PTSD was the topic. And I want to bring the aspect that organizational stress, everyday stress, life stress can be just as impactful, if not more, in our fire service world.
That's interesting, Arjuna. Just the first time I've heard of burnout was with Hamilton. Hamilton was using a company called MMI, Multi Mini Interview, but they use that question quite frequently. And the way they word it is, can you tell us what burnout is? And tell us what you can do to avoid burnout. And that was the first time I heard that question, I think it was 10 or 11 years ago. But it's still being used to get, Guelph just did their interviews and they use an MMI format as well. And that was the exact question they asked is what is burnout and what can you do to avoid it? So it's interesting that, departments or interviewers have picked up on that quite a few years ago.
Fantastic news.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I truly think there's probably more people, and probably everyone in this room right now is going to class or is going to be dealing with stress, potential burnout factors in your career more than PTSD.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. Good. And what's your, I was just going to ask you, resiliency. So is resiliency basically exactly stress management? Is that what it is? Is that the more things that you do to manage your day-to-day stresses and your stresses at work, is that being more resilient to stress? Is that what they're focusing on, Arjuna?
I would definitely say resiliency is all of that, everything we've talked about in the last hour, putting that into your toolkit and having a self-care toolkit that you can access anytime that allows you to regain your nervous system, to get out of the parasympathetic or out of the sympathetic into the parasympathetic. All these different things come into being more resilient. And resilience really only occurs when you are challenged. So if you never challenge yourself and you never step outside that comfort zone, you're never going to become more resilient. And so becoming more resilient means you're going to push yourself a little bit. And being in this room today, you are pushing yourself. You are stepping one step closer to landing that job or landing that volunteer position, whatever that looks like. So I truly think resiliency is all that put together, practice all the time. And it's also a mindset as well. I think resiliency, there's definitely a concept and a part of mindset that is super important because it's so easy to get stuck in the negative talk, negative self-talk, depressive states or anxiety states, and having a healthy mindset about life and about what you're doing. That can come from being mindful and just having time alone with yourself. I think a lot of us high achievers and high performers, we don't spend enough time just by ourselves. That doesn't have to be meditating, or doesn't have to be mindfulness. Just time by yourself. You sit on a rock and you just stare out in the ocean or whatever that looks like. I think we spend so much time on the go, we never take care and just reset. 5-10 minutes, that's all it takes.
Good point.
If I had to define what resiliency was, I would say the classic term of bouncing back from tragedy or turbulence or challenges. But I like to add that you're bouncing back better than you were before. So I talk about in my book about resiliency and how I don't like it being a yo-yo, where very similar to some of those fad diets out there, you lose 10, you gain 20, you lose 10, you gain 40. Those yo-yo diets don't work. Same with stress management. If you're here nice and relaxed and you go stress, then you're back to relax and back to stress. That's not a good life, right? So we're all going to experience stress no matter what, guaranteed 100%, we're all going to experience stress. But if we can come back better each time, our time to regain our homeostasis or our nervous system reset or just relaxation is going to get shorter and shorter each time. So bouncing back, but bouncing back better than you were before. And that could be through education, that could be through counseling, therapy, self-reflection, whatever that looks like. You're just coming back a little bit better than you were before.
That's a great point, Arjuna. I love it, especially in an interview when you're talking about a behavioral based interview. If you can come up with a situation where you did exactly that, where you had that injury and you bounced back more so than you were before, and you were able to explain that. I think that's great point.
I think if you can say that and prove it in a story, that's going to land you some serious credit with the interview panel, because it's proving that you went through turbulent time, you went through a challenge, you managed it, and you came out stronger on the other end. To me, that's a win-win, and that's somebody I would want to hire.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Great. Thank you, Arjuna. Dave, did you want to finish off with sorry, did you want to finish off with something?
Yeah.
I don't want to put you on the spot. I just wasn't sure if you're going to do, I know you touched on the breathing thing, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, we can talk about, I'm really, I don't know how if the group around the table or who are in the room today understand the kind of value of stuff that they're getting. They have 3 authors in the room. One is focused on interviews. 2 have focused on mental health and resiliency. I've done lots of courses in the States on developing firefighter resiliency as per our book. And it keeps coming back to, how do you build people? Well, you identify what resiliency is, from a really base point. It first started being recognized when it was written back in the 1600s, based on the Latin word resiliere. And to Arjuna's point about bounce back, nowadays it comes down to, can somebody recover, adapt, and grow? So lots of people can recover, but not a lot of people can adapt and grow. So a couple of things that might help you put a perspective on it. We're throwing a bunch of ideas out. Go on YouTube. If you are familiar with Jocko Willink, he has a really good 2-minute video. Type in the word Jocko and the word good, and it will pull up a 2-minute video where he identifies how he recovers from an upset and how he adapts and how he grows. And it simply comes down to the word good, being able to recognize a difficult situation, and instead of going, crap, this happened, I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm going to wear this, I'm going to carry it as baggage, he flips his mindset within one word: good. All right, what am I going to, this is good that this has happened. This is good that I have an interview coming up. This is good that I have a chance to prove my skill set. And when there is a setback, reframing it, saying, all right, how can I adapt? How can I grow from it? So I think as we think of ourselves as the resilient kid that wipes out on their bike, and they stand up and they pluck the stone out of their knee, and they put the hand over their kneecap, and they stop the blood, and they get back on the bike. Everybody around the room will have that. You've either gone through interviews and you've been denied, or you will go through interviews and not feel like it was the best, but you're going to go through that one interview where you go, yes, this all came together. All those prior life lessons were for a reason. I'll finish off with 2 things that I think build our resiliency. One is an understanding of the role of music. If you have a playlist that you use in the gym, recognize that it's probably 120 beats a minute. The best song that gets you jacked, that gets you to run, lift weights, is probably in the 100 to 140 beats per minute range. So acknowledge it, play with it. But when you're going to bed and you're trying to facilitate sleep, listening to a beat that's, whether it's Eminem or any of your favorite artists, going to sleep is a different playlist. If you're going to facilitate that, then you need to be around the 60 to 80 beats a minute. And kind of understanding the science of it will help your brain slow down, will help you breathe, will help you slide into that initial stage of sleep. Out of the 4 stages, you'll get in there much faster, and you'll hit the 4th, which is much better for healthcare or for brain health. Last thing I'd share with you is my favorite is good old box breathing. Some of you may have heard it. Box breathing is where we simply take something that's square, and you're going to inhale like a box, following a box. So you're going to inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold your breath. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4, and exhale. Sorry, I missed that. So inhale, hold, exhale, or sorry, hold and exhale. You know what I'm trying to say. Anyways, the combination of inhale, hold, exhale, hold gets you to a point where if you're trying to slow down at night, you're trying to get into your sleep pattern, practice box breathing. There's a couple of videos on YouTube about it if you need to, but simply looking at a rectangle object, track your eyes, use a count of 4, use a count of 8, anything that'll engage that brake pedal to your adrenaline. So when your brain is super excited and you're thinking about your interview tomorrow, inhale 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, exhale 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4. And when that all comes together, you can say at your interview, how do you handle stress? Well, I change my breathing patterns. I change my self-talk. I do mental rehearsal. I practice physical exercise. I eat well. I practice good sleep patterns because I change my room. I go see a professional when I need to. Sometimes I just vent to a friend. So there's so many things that we've talked on tonight that'll help you take care of yourself and prove to your potential employer that you've got your act together and you'd be a good candidate to hire.
That's great. Thanks, Dave. And I just want to thank Arjuna and Dave. They're both here today. There's obviously no payment here. This is all free. So just thanks very much for your time. I learned a lot, and it's going to definitely help me in my interview coaching. And I'm hoping it'll help a lot of the candidates here today in preparing a lot of their answers as well, just getting a more perspective on stress management. One thing I was going to ask guys is if you could type in, and I'm going to be around for the next 10 minutes. So if anybody has any questions, I'll be around for 10 minutes. You could just ask me. If anybody has any specific things that they want, maybe give me some ideas of the next webinar to host, whether it's focusing on city policies like diversity, workplace harassment, maybe situational based questions, whatever you think that you guys think would be a good seminar or webinar, just throw it in the message box. It'd be great. Thank you.
Right on. Thanks for your time today, Arjuna. It was a pleasure to meet you. And thanks, Sean, for the invite. I've enjoyed being here.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Arjuna. It was good meeting you too.
Yeah, it's been an honor. Appreciate it. And yeah, feel free to reach out anytime.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks again, guys.
Dustin, good luck tomorrow.
Oh, Dustin, you got an interview tomorrow? Good luck.
I do. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's pretty surreal. I've come a long way in 20 years waiting for something like this to happen. Like Dave said, try to get your mind into the zone and be prepared. So, like you said, I'm sitting in the room. Interview is tomorrow.
Attaboy. Good job.
Right on.
I figured the best way to get ready for this is just to be right here. So,
what department are you interviewing with?
That's awesome.
Municipality of Trent Hills for deputy chief.
Oh, Trent Hills. Okay. That's not, I'm just trying to think. Trent Hills, is that?
Campbellford, Hastings, Warkworth.
Oh, yeah. I'm right next door to you. I'm Norwood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sean,
okay.
I don't know if you remember, Dustin was one of our students like 20 years ago.
The name really rang
20 years ago. Fleming's very first run of pre-service.
Yep. He was the first year. So anyways, I invited him tonight. Anyways, good to hear from you, man.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
All the best to you tomorrow.
Fleming was absolutely, I'm speechless on how today played out. I had a phone call with Dave at lunchtime today to just chat and focus and just acquire things I've known for 20 years that were not upfront and clear. And just to move forward into tomorrow, just to have a good game plan, how to word things like you guys have said, don't short word your answers and be confident in your answers. And just there's almost to the point where you can't say too much.
Yeah. Most times, Dustin, people don't say enough. Like it's about 1% of the people I see that talk too much. It's very rare, but most people, they're very short because as firefighters, we're 8 personalities, but at the same time, we're very modest and we're humble. So we don't like to sell ourselves. We don't like to brag, or so to speak, right? So we end up selling ourselves short when we don't say enough information. But absolutely, you've got to really get into the details, especially in behavioral-based interviewing, or any questions when it comes to selling yourself based on your resume. Like, what have you done to prepare? You have to get into the details.
Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah, good. Right on.
Nice to you, Dustin.
Thanks, Arjuna.
Right on.
Anybody else have any questions? We're here for another 5 or 10 minutes. Yep.
Sean, I'm going to say goodnight.
Okay, Dave.
Arjuna, it was a real pleasure. I would think, actually, based on our conversation tonight, I'd like to pick up your book, and we'll talk to you at a later time.
Fantastic. Same. All the best, yeah. Great to meet
I'm
you.
going to pick your book up too, Arjuna. I learned a lot today. It's definitely going to help me in my profession. It's also going to help me in interview coaching as well. So I do appreciate your time, Arjuna. I appreciate your time, Dave. Thanks very much. Good.
All right, we good?
We're good.
All right.
Okay, take care, guys.
Yeah,
See you later.
all the best, yeah. Good luck.
Okay. Bye now. Hey, Carol, I see you're still there. Do you have any questions for me? Yep.